locked away in warehouses, built in total silence, or released in such tiny numbers they vanished instantly. These cars were never meant for the spotlight. Some were top-secret prototypes. Others were high-performance monsters whispered about in racing circles. And a few were so strange, so advanced, or so controversial, they were hidden on purpose. Here are 12 of the most secret American cars ever built, and you won't believe they actually exist. The tale of the 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1, Boss 600, or as it was whispered about internally, the Stubby, is one of those shadowy footnotes in American muscle car mythology that lives entirely between rumor, erased memos, and the half-remembered stories of retired engineers. It never appeared in brochures, wasn't built for homologation, and no officially sanctioned photographs exist. But in the dim, echoing halls of Ford's Dearborn Proving Grounds, it was very real, at least for a brief and terrifying moment. By the late 1960s, Ford was riding high on the success of the Mustang. With the Mach 1 and the Boss 429 already shaking the earth, Ford's experimental division, a small, semi-autonomous skunkworks buried deep in their advanced engineering program, began to tinker with something even more radical. While the Boss 429 was Ford's halo engine for NASCAR homologation, it was still relatively civilized in street form. But someone, likely inspired by ongoing Ford Marine racing engine development, decided to ask, what happens when we put a 600-plus cubic inch experimental V8 into a Mustang fastback? The answer was equal parts awe-inspiring and catastrophic. Cobbled together from components derived from Ford's Marine racing program, oversized forged internals, exotic alloy heads, and gargantuan Holley carburetors atop a tunnel ram intake, the Boss 600 engine wasn't designed for a street car. It was meant to push high-speed hulls across open water at triple-digit speeds. Repurposing it for a 200-pound Mustang with a short wheelbase and questionable traction was something between madness and genius. Depending on who you ask, the displacement ranged anywhere from 603 to 618 cubic inches. Nobody can say for certain, as the engine was never logged under any production block code. Internally, the Mule was known as Stubby. No one's quite sure if the name referred to its cut-down headers, shortened drive shaft, or the brutally short lifespan it endured. One Ford engineer, now long retired, once described it in an oral history as the loudest damn thing we ever made, louder than the Le Mans GT40s. You couldn't hear yourself think when it fired up. The whole building would vibrate. The car itself was supposedly a stripped-down Mach 1 test shell. No sound deadening, no undercoating, just bare steel, welds, and a roll cage bolted in by panicked technicians. It had reinforced rear leaf springs, custom ladder bars, and prototype magnesium wheels that reportedly cracked under repeated torque launches. There was no air cleaner, just open velocity stacks peeking through a brutally hacked hood. The test that ended it all took place on a late summer morning in 1969. On the third run, down a private backstretch of the Dearborn test track, the Boss 600 launched with such violent torque that the hardened steel drive shaft twisted and tore itself in half, ripping through the transmission tunnel like shrapnel. At the same time, the raw torque stressed the front subframe so severely that cracks appeared around the firewall and A-pillars. The wells on the motor mounts reportedly gave way, slamming the big block forward and bending the radiator support. The test driver, wearing what little protective gear Ford had at the time, escaped uninjured, but the car did not. After the incident, the test mule was reportedly dragged into one of the back garages of Ford's experimental vehicles building and stripped of everything valuable. The engine, now too powerful and unstable for even experimental use, was supposedly sent to the Marine Division for teardown and disposal. Some claim it was later repurposed for a high-performance offshore boat. Others think it was quietly scrapped to avoid legal exposure. The body shell, that too vanished. There are whispers that it was quietly crushed with other test wrecks at the Rouge plant's disposal yard. No photos have ever surfaced. No official paperwork has ever been released. But several internal memos from 1970 reference a test article called Stubby, with warnings attached about torque-induced structural failure. Ford has never officially acknowledged the project. When asked decades later about the Boss 600, former executives deflected or outright denied its existence. But among the few who worked in Dearborn's more secretive corners during the era, the story lives on. The 1969 Mustang Mach 1 Boss 600 remains one of the most tantalizing what-ifs of the muscle car era, a monster so extreme, so unmanageable, that it was silenced before it ever roared in public. Its brief, violent existence was a glimpse into a parallel universe where Detroit's obsession with power might have gone one step too far. It was banned not because of a rule book, but because the laws of physics and sanity could not contain it. Today, it lingers in the shadows of muscle car history, a ghost of torque, fire, and shattered steel. The 1980 Buick Skyhawk GNX V6 turbo concept is one of the most deeply buried secrets in GM's performance history. An ambitious and short-lived experiment that predated the iconic Grand National by several years and hinted at what could have been an earlier turbocharged revolution for Buick. While the GNX and its turbocharged 3.8-liter V6 would go on to become muscle car legends in the mid to late 80s, this obscure precursor, a compact-sized brute with blacked-out menace, was quietly built and tested in the shadows long before the world was ready for it. The Skyhawk itself was not the stuff of legend. Built on GM's rear-wheel drive H-body platform, it shared bones with the Chevrolet Monza, Oldsmobile Starfire, and Pontiac Sunbird, economy-oriented coupes marketed to a budget-minded audience. But in the late 1970s, Buick's engineering team, already immersed in early turbocharging experiments on the Regal, asked a radical question. What if we cram the torque-heavy, boosted 3.8L V6, still in its infancy, into the smallest RWD body GM had? The answer was the Skyhawk GNX Turbo concept, or as it was known internally, Project Raven. According to surviving fragments of internal documents and two ex-GM engineers who anonymously recounted their involvement in later interviews, at least two hand-built prototypes were assembled in early 1980 at the Milford Proving Grounds. The cars featured a heavily modified 3.8L V6 outfitted with early versions of what would become GNX spec components: a Garrett T3 turbo, intercooler prototypes, custom fabricated headers, and a crude but functional electronic spark control system. Compression was dropped, fueling was upgraded, and the exhaust note was described as demonic for such a small car. The exterior was a quiet scream. Inspired by the stealthy aesthetic of the later Grand Nationals, the Skyhawk concepts were finished in matte black with steel wheels widened to accommodate Goodyear GT radials. There were no GN badges, just a subdued Buick crest and a louvered rear window treatment. Inside, the cars were gutted of frills, fitted with rally gauges, a sports steering wheel, and optional Recaro-style seats, scavenged from an Opel parts bin. And then there was the performance. During late winter testing at Milford, one engineer reportedly recorded a 0 to 60 time of 5.9 seconds in a sub-14-second quarter mile. Numbers utterly unheard of in 1980, especially from a Buick compact. But the thrill didn't last. The Skyhawk chassis, originally built to support four-cylinder and low-output V8 engines, simply couldn't cope with the raw torque of the boosted V6. During track testing, both prototypes experienced severe wheel hop, axle flex, and alarming body twist under full throttle. One test ended with a rear control arm failure at high speed, sending the car into a ditch, mercifully without injury. Another suffered stress cracks along the firewall and torque box mounts after just a week of testing. Worse still, GM executives, already under intense regulatory and economic pressure in the wake of the second gas crisis, were reportedly horrified when they discovered the internal project. A performance-leaning compact car didn't align with the corporate vision of smaller, fuel-efficient, and safe vehicles aimed at economy buyers. Marketing had no idea how to position it. There was no performance compact segment yet. The very notion of a turbo Buick coupe that outran a Corvette was, in the words of one Buick executive, a PR disaster waiting to happen. By mid-1980, the Skyhawk GNX concept was dead, killed before it could even be formally named. The Mules were ordered dismantled and scrapped. One is rumored to have survived, spirited away by a sympathetic engineer, then sold off under the radar. Decades later, sightings of a suspiciously fast black Skyhawk at local Detroit drag strips in the early 90s gave the legend new fuel, but nothing has ever been confirmed. Buick, for its part, has officially denied that the project existed. No press releases, no internal memos, no documentation survives in their archives. But for those few who remember the brief, howling life of Project Raven, the memory lingers like the sharp whistle of a turbo spooling in the cold dawn air. Had it lived, the 1980 Skyhawk GNX Turbo could have rewritten the book on compact performance. It wasn't just ahead of its time, it was a time bomb, fast, unstable, and impossible to market in the Reagan-era automotive landscape. A prototype that combined economy car size with muscle car fury and paid the price for its ambition. The 1974 Chevrolet Chevelle Laguna Type SS 454 wide-body test car, known internally as the Black Widow, is one of those haunting specters in GM's murky history. A car whispered about among engineers and racing insiders, but never officially acknowledged. It wasn't built for showrooms. It wasn't built for the press. It was built for one reason: to dominate the high banks of NASCAR before the rule makers could catch on. By the early 1970s, General Motors was publicly out of racing. A corporate ban put in place in 1963 officially prohibited direct involvement in motorsports. But behind closed doors, certain divisions found ways to skirt that edict, particularly in the name of aerodynamic research. Chevrolet's engineers, many of whom had deep ties to both Trans Am and NASCAR, quietly funneled resources into experimental projects that could inform GM's teams without being traced back to the mothership. Enter the Black Widow. The base was a 1974 Chevelle Laguna Type S3, a car that, unlike its earlier Chevelle siblings, came with NASCAR in mind. The S3's urethane nose and improved aerodynamics made it a natural candidate for high-speed testing. But what emerged from the bowels of GM's Milford Proving Grounds bore only a passing resemblance to the production car. The Black Widow wore radical, hand-rolled steel wide-body fenders that bulged aggressively over experimental racing slicks. Its hood was a smoothed-out fiberglass cowl, and the rear fenders were subtly flared and reshaped for better high-speed stability. Up front, an enormous custom-fabricated chin spoiler jutted forward, mounted flush beneath a blacked-out grille. The whole car sat low, almost too low, with jounce stops that made it corner like a stock car, not a street cruiser. Under the hood was a detuned version of the legendary LS6 454, a motor that had terrorized the streets in 1970, now fitted with race-grade headers, a deep sump oil pan, and a Holley 850 CFM carb-tuned, not for power, but sustained high RPM operation. It reportedly made around 425 AUP, not at all radical by today's standards, but with a stripped-out interior, lightweight body panels, and aggressive gearing, the Black Widow moved with terrifying purpose. Testing was done under a shroud of secrecy. The car was trucked, not driven, to Riverside Raceway in Talladega in the dead of night, often wearing mismatched wheels or primer-colored panels to avoid attracting attention. One former GM test driver, who spoke anonymously years later, recalled that the car handled like no Chevelle ever should. It felt glued to the track, even at 150 plus. You'd forget it was a full-bodied family car until you hit the brakes and it tried to kill you. It's said the Black Widow ran several unofficial laps at Talladega in the 170-180 mph range, faster than most of the sanctioned cars of the era, but its radical aero bodywork, though never raced officially, made its way into the hands of certain Chevy-backed NASCAR teams soon after. The wide-body styling, spoiler designs, and hood venting bore uncanny resemblance to elements that appeared on 1975 and 1976 Laguna racers, including those fielded by Junior Johnson and Cale Yarborough. The car itself, however, was never meant to survive. In 1975, as NASCAR began to crack down on what it called unofficial factory support, Chevrolet doubled down on secrecy. The Black Widow was quietly moved into a locked storage unit at GM's Detroit area testing facility, covered, unregistered, and never spoken of outside the engineering team. It sat there for nearly a decade, gathering dust, its very existence unrecorded, unarchived. Then, sometime around 1982, a private GM track event at the Proving Grounds saw it fired up again. A handful of employees, mostly retirees and old guard engineers, witnessed it scream down the track one last time. According to a rumor that has never been confirmed, a suspension failure during that session, caused by stress fractures in the rear trailing arms, nearly caused a rollover. That incident sealed its fate. Shortly after, the car was stripped of anything reusable and unceremoniously crushed. No fanfare, no photos, just a quiet, bureaucratic execution to erase a chapter that had already been written in pencil. Today, there is no surviving documentation of the Black Widow in Chevrolet's public archives. The few people who knew it existed are retired, and most won't talk. No VIN, no photographs, no press releases. And yet, the stories persist, shared in hushed tones by those who lived the era. Was the Black Widow real? Absolutely. Too many unrelated sources corroborate its existence. But was it ever meant to be seen? Never. It was a Chevelle born not for showrooms, but for speed, secrecy, and silence. A wide-bodied banshee screaming in the desert night, forgotten not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. The 1961 Pontiac Tempest Le Mans Super Duty 421 coupe was a creation so unholy and violent that even Pontiac, a division not known for playing it safe, ultimately buried the evidence under a pile of shredded aluminum and corporate denial. At its core, it was an economy car turned Frankenstein's monster. A featherweight compact merged with a drag-spec engine built for all-out warfare. It was never offered for sale, never appeared in any brochures, and never got an official code. But for a brief moment in 1962, it lit up a stretch of asphalt and cracked the sky open like a thunderclap. And then, it tore itself apart. To understand how such a car came to be, you have to know what the Tempest was originally meant to be. Introduced for the 1961 model year, the first-generation Pontiac Tempest was a GM A-body, but very different from its Chevy, Buick, and Oldsmobile siblings. It used a unique rear-mounted transaxle to achieve near-perfect 50-50 weight distribution, connected to the engine via a flexible torque shaft famously known as the rope drive. It also had independent rear suspension, extremely rare for an American car at the time, and a flat floor with no transmission hump. Under the hood sat a half a V8 four-cylinder engine, cut from the 389, which was designed for frugality, not fury. But inside Pontiac's engineering skunkworks, the same misfits who later birthed the GTO, someone had a much darker idea. According to former GM insiders and historians who've pieced together the story over decades, a team of Pontiac engineers, fascinated by the balance and lightness of the Tempest, wondered what would happen if they dropped a full Super Duty 421 cubic inch V8 under the hood. This wasn't the street 421. This was the full race version, built with forged internals, a solid lifter camshaft, and dual 4-barrel carbs on a high-rise manifold. It made nearly 400 horsepower and an obscene amount of torque. In 1961, this was enough to shatter drivetrains and reputations alike. But they didn't stop there. To counteract the extra weight up front, the team allegedly commissioned experimental aluminum front-end panels from GM's parts division, hood, fenders, bumper, and inner supports, and stripped the car's interior to the bone. Side glass was rumored to have been replaced with plexiglass, and the steel wheels were swapped for magnesium Americans. At full build weight, the car came in well under 3,000 pounds. Lighter than a Corvette of the time, but with more power and a center of gravity that dared physics to interfere. And then they drag raced it. A handful of quiet tests were conducted at Michigan's Milan Dragway in late 1961 and early 62, under cover of night. One mechanic on the project later described the experience as like stuffing nitroglycerin into a paper bag and drop-kicking it. On its first run, the Tempest Super Duty smoked the slicks through first and second. On its second run, it pulled the front wheels. On its third run, the unibody began to buckle. But it was the fourth pass that sealed its fate. Launched hard on slicks with nearly 500 lb-ft of torque, the combination of the high-revving Super Duty 421, the whip-like rope drive, and the stressed aluminum panels caused the chassis to flex so violently that the rear transaxle misaligned with the torque tube. The resulting pressure twisted the floor pan, popped the rear glass, and buckled the firewall. Observers claimed the car nearly split in two. It crossed the line in the low 11s and never moved under its own power again. GM, already under pressure from its corporate ban on racing and terrified of regulatory heat, shut the project down immediately. The car was allegedly towed back to the Pontiac Engineering Center under a tarp and quietly dismantled over the course of several weeks. Aluminum parts were destroyed. The 421 engine was repurposed for another Super Duty Catalina. No press release was ever issued, but a single photograph survives. A grainy black and white image showing a scuffed 1961 Tempest Le Mans coupe with 421 Super Duty scrawled across the fender in crude factory stencil lettering. The front end appears to the hood is missing entirely and the car sits low on mismatched drag tires. The photo circulated briefly in underground drag racing zines in the 1980s, accompanied by anonymous commentary from those who knew someone who was there. Pontiac never acknowledged the car. No VIN has ever been traced. The name Tempest Super Duty 421 doesn't exist in any official GM registry, but in hushed corners of muscle car history, it remains a legend. The car that proved a compact economy coupe could harness true superstock power for just long enough to destroy itself. The 1961 Pontiac Tempest Le Mans 421 SD wasn't banned by a memo. It was banned by physics. And maybe that's the most honest kind of banishment a car can suffer. The 2002 Cadillac STS5 manual 6-speed Mule is the kind of forbidden fruit that haunts enthusiasts and engineers alike. A car that should have changed everything, but instead was silenced before it ever had a voice. It existed only as a test mule, pieced together in secrecy deep inside GM's proving grounds, where passion occasionally escaped the grip of policy. It wasn't just a hot rod in a business suit. It was a declaration that Cadillac could fight the Germans and win on their own terms. With a V8 soundtrack and a gear shift you actually had to work. By the early 2000s, Cadillac was reinventing itself. The aging image of land yachts and vinyl roofs was giving way to a modernist future, built on the crisp-edged art and science design philosophy and a renewed desire to be taken seriously against BMW and Mercedes-Benz. But before the CTS-V was greenlit, before Nürburgring testing, supercharged V8s, or public declarations of performance intent, there was a quiet experiment involving the full-size Seville touring sedan, the STS. This mule was never supposed to happen. Officially, Cadillac had no plans to offer a manual transmission in any of its V8-powered sedans. But inside GM's advanced engineering division, a few restless hands decided to build a prototype anyway. They started with a standard 2002 STS, already a quick, capable front driver, with the high-output 4.6-liter Northstar V8 making 300 API, and did the unthinkable. They ripped out the 4T80E automatic and installed a 6-speed Tremec manual gearbox from the Corvette parts bin. Heavily modified Northstar engine mounts, custom half shafts, and a reprogrammed PCM followed, along with a limited-slip differential scavenged from a wrecked FWD performance prototype. But this wasn't just a transmission swap. The car also received a secretly developed early version of GM's magnetic ride control system, years before it went into production. At the time, magnetic suspension was still experimental, mostly tested on Corvettes and obscure Saturn prototypes. Engineers tuned it specifically for the heavier front end and luxury ride quality of the STS, creating a balance of control and compliance that reportedly stunned even skeptical GM brass. The prototype sat slightly lower than the stock, wore stiffer bushings, and ran on unique 18-inch forged wheels with early run-flat Michelin rubber. And it moved. According to one former test driver, the STS-V Mule could hit 60 mph in the mid-5-second range, pulled confidently through triple-digit speeds, and had a surprisingly neutral balance for a front-drive platform. The manual gearbox, though not as crisp as a BMW's, gave the car a raw and deliberate character that completely transformed its personality. It was a Mercedes killer with American boots, the driver said in a 2007 anonymous forum post, later verified by 2 retired GM engineers. You could leave it in third and still outrun an E430. But Cadillac's marketing department was terrified. At the time, the STS was the pinnacle of Cadillac luxury, not a sports sedan, but a modern Lincoln fighter aimed at middle-aged professionals who weren't supposed to care about clutch pedals or cornering G-forces. A manual, even one as refined and tractable as the Tremec, didn't fit the brand's image. Executives feared it would confuse buyers, alienate traditional customers, and muddy the waters as Cadillac prepared for the upcoming CTS launch. Worse, it risked overshadowing the new Sigma platform that Cadillac was betting the future on, a clean-sheet RWD chassis designed specifically for the next generation of performance. In late 2002, a final evaluation meeting was held. Engineers reportedly begged for a limited-run model, something discreet, maybe even just for Cadillac's performance division. Marketing refused. The prototype was returned to the Mesa, Arizona desert test track one last time, flogged until its clutch started to slip and the magnetic dampers began to overheat. Then quietly and without ceremony, it was shipped back to Detroit and scrapped in early 2003. Its VIN was never logged publicly. Its gearbox was salvaged. The body? Crushed and forgotten. The CTS-V would arrive just a year later, built on GM's new rear-wheel drive architecture and with a 400 HP LS6 V8 and a 6-speed manual. It was the car Cadillac did choose to bet on, and it paid off, but somewhere in the desert dust, the original vision lived and died alone. The 2002 Cadillac STS-V manual Mule wasn't just a test car. It was a moment of adhesion, a ghost of a Cadillac that might have existed in a different universe. One where American luxury embraced rawness and risk, where leather met shift levers and chrome met corners, and where the badge didn't ask for permission. It demanded respect. The 1977 Dodge Dart 426 W2 test block drag car was the kind of machine whispered about in Mopar garages late at night, a brutal rogue creation born from the twilight years of Detroit's muscle era, when gas crises, insurance premiums, and emissions laws had already slaughtered most of the street beasts of the 60s. On paper, a 1907 Dart shouldn't have had any more fire left in it. The nameplate was nearing retirement. The big blocks were gone. The Hemi had been dead and buried for nearly a decade. But not everyone at Dodge was ready to go quietly. This car wasn't on any option list. It didn't exist in any order forms. No brochures, no marketing materials, no dealer window stickers ever listed it. That's because the 1907 Dodge Dart 426 W2 was never meant to be sold. And technically, it wasn't even meant to be built. It was a pure backdoor special, a Frankenstein monster of experimental engine technology, race shop handiwork, and engineering rebellion. And like many of the most dangerous things Detroit ever created, it wasn't built by executives or planners. It was built by a handful of gearheads who wanted to see how far the Dart could still go before the corporate suits pulled the plug. At the heart of it was a prototype version of the 426 W2 block. This wasn't your grandfather's street Hemi. Developed as part of Chrysler's renewed effort to dominate NHRA Pro Stock racing, the W2 was a special evolution of the old big block architecture, cast in iron, but with redesigned high-flow heads that could breathe deeper, rev higher, and take more punishment. While the standard 426 Hemi had long since been retired from production, the W2 head program was still alive and well inside Mopar Performance Engineering. The idea, take this new head design, slap it on a race-prepped, overbuilt Hemi-style bottom end, and drop it into a lightweight body that nobody would suspect. Enter the 1907 Dart. By the late 70s, the Dart was an aging economy model, but it had a short wheelbase, a wide engine bay, and, in its base trim, barely anything to remove. The car chosen for the build was a plain white coupe, likely from internal inventory or a press fleet holdover. It was stripped to the bones, no sound deadening, no air conditioning, no radio, no insulation. The front clip was replaced with fiberglass panels. The rear seat was deleted. Windows were fixed. The only instrumentation that mattered was oil pressure and attach. One former Chrysler engineer, who later went on to work in NASCAR, claimed the engine was dynoed at over 530 horsepower without nitrous. It ran open headers in testing and was mated to a manual-shifted Torque Flight 727 with a custom stall converter. Rear end was a narrow Dana 60, of course, with 4.88 gears and massive drag slicks stuffed under the fender wells with surgical precision. Front brakes were reportedly factory drums, just enough to stop it in a pinch, while the rear end had line locks and racing shackles. The car wore no badges. It had barely functional taillights, and it had a hand-lettered name on the passenger side valve cover, the White Lie, because that's exactly what it was. You see, by 1907, Chrysler's official stance was that muscle cars were over. The company was hemorrhaging money, clawing for bailouts, embracing for a new era of front-wheel drive K cars and fuel economy regulations. So this car wasn't just off the books, it was anti-books. Rumor has it that the test team never even logged the VIN, and one source claimed the car didn't have a proper VIN plate at all, just a stamped firewall code from a long-dead prototype batch. And it ran, in closed course testing at Milan and later at a quiet drag strip in Indiana. The White Lie reportedly clocked low 10-second passes with no nitrous, running consistent 10.2s at over 130 mph. This in a time when showroom Camaros were struggling to break 16s. Engineers said it launched so hard that it yanked the front tires with nothing more than a foot brake launch and 3,000 RPM. It looked like a grocery getter, said one retired Mopar test driver, but it ate pro stockers alive. Then in 1978, it disappeared. The official story? A change in leadership at Chrysler, triggered by the financial crisis that eventually led to the arrival of Lee Iacocca, resulted in a purge of unauthorized projects. Word spread that anything unapproved or politically risky had to go. If it didn't wear a suit and tie, one insider joked, it got buried. The White Lie was reportedly put on a transport truck and sent out west for evaluation. It never came back. But the unofficial stories, the ones that refuse to die, say something else. One tale claims the car was quietly sold to a favored private Mopar drag racer under a handshake deal, stripped of its experimental engine, and run under a different name. Others say it was dismantled in pieces, with the W2 motor ending up in a superstock duster that terrorized Midwest drag. The 1965 Mercury Comet Cyclone Camera Coupe is one of those eerie footnotes in muscle car lore, a phantom that supposedly roared once through Ford's proving grounds before vanishing without a trace. Unlike most muscle car legends that center around racing victories or showroom exclusivity, the Camera Cyclone was never meant to win trophies or be sold to the public. It was a secret weapon, born out of back-channel engineering obsession and legal rebellion, and quietly silenced by the very company that built it. To understand why this car was so forbidden, you have to start with the engine. The 427 SOHC Camera. Originally developed by Ford to dominate NASCAR in the mid-1960s, the Camera was a monstrous single-overhead camshaft version of the FE Big Block 427. It featured hemispherical combustion chambers, an absurd 7,000-plus RPM redline, and made well over 600 HP in race trim, at a time when the average V8 sedan made about 180. NASCAR quickly banned it on technicalities, fearing it would give Ford an unfair and possibly unsafe edge. That effectively left the engine homeless. It was too wild for the street, too exotic for mass production, and too powerful to ignore. And yet, sometime in mid-1965, it allegedly found its way into a Mercury Comet Cyclone coupe. Not just any Cyclone, this one was a pre-production engineering test mule. Stripped of trim and painted a dull silver blue, it reportedly came equipped with a 4-speed top-loader transmission, a trunk-mounted battery for weight balance, and heavy-duty traction bars welded into the rear subframe. No Cyclone badges, no chrome, no comfort options. Just a tachometer bolted to the dash and a pair of slicks tucked under slightly rolled fenders. One internal memo from a Ford performance engineer, referred to it as Project RDX, though what that stood for remains unclear to this day. Why Mercury? Because in the early 60s, Mercury was being groomed as Ford's performance luxury brand. Think of it as their answer to Pontiac. The Cyclone specifically was already a potent package, small, light, and available with the same 289 Hypo V8 found in early Mustangs. But someone inside Ford wanted to see how far they could push it, and when the 427 camera was banned from the oval tracks, it became a ticking time bomb with nowhere to go. Until a few rogue engineers decided to light the fuse. There are only a handful of written references to the car. One appears in a 1965 test log from Ford's Dearborn Proving Grounds, marked Cyclone C, SOHC trial, unstable at high revs, severe axle hop above 5,000 RPM. Another appears in a memo from the Advanced Engineering Division, which notes exceptional acceleration, combustion odor inside cabin, and serious driveline strain. A third, handwritten on a grease-stained piece of notebook paper reportedly recovered from a Mercury Performance Division archive, simply reads, "Revs like a chainsaw, scared the hell out of it, redacted. Do not repeat." Eyewitness accounts from retired Ford employees are rare, but one surfaced in a 1990s Collector magazine interview. The engineer, who insisted on anonymity, claimed he rode in the car during a brief test at Romeo Proving Grounds. According to him, the engine was so loud and so aggressive that even at half throttle, it felt like a race car with mufflers. It had no street manners, he said. None. The clutch was like stepping on a brick, and once the cams came on, forget it. You didn't drive it. You just aimed it and hoped. The handling was reportedly terrifying. With the big Cammer engine up front and no aerodynamic tuning, the front end got light above 80 mph. The rear end squatted hard under acceleration and danced under braking. The frame flexed, the glass shook, and the transmission tunnel radiated so much heat that the center console warped. One driver even refused to take it out for a second run, claiming it felt like the car wanted to leap into the trees. After just a few weeks of secret testing, the car was pulled. The official reason: unsafe for street evaluation. A decision was made at the executive level to kill any plans of putting the SOHC 427 into any street-legal Ford or Mercury. Insurance companies were already targeting high-horsepower muscle cars, and Ford's legal department feared massive liability issues. As the Mustang GT350 and Fairlane Thunderbolt soaked up attention, the Cyclone Camry was quietly erased. The car itself? It was either dismantled or reassigned. Stories vary. One tale claims the body was crushed and the drivetrain reused in a factory-backed drag racer. Another says the car was flat-towed to a Michigan barn and hidden by an engineer who couldn't bear to see it destroyed. Yet another claims it was sold without title to a private collector, under the condition that it would never be raced or registered. No photographs have ever surfaced. No build sheets, no VIN publicly associated with it, only a whisper trail of oil, fear. The 1997 Chevrolet Impala SS 54 prototype is one of those forbidden machines that slips through the cracks of official automotive history. Too fast, too loud, and too unprofitable to ever reach the light of day. It was born at the wrong time, in the wrong political climate, and carried the right kind of power at the worst possible moment. It never made it past the gates of GM's testing facilities, but those who saw it run still talk about it like a ghost, sleek, brutal, and undeniably real. To understand why it existed at all, you have to go back to the mid-1990s. Chevrolet had struck unexpected gold with the 1994-1996 Impala SS, a sinister full-size performance sedan powered by the 260 HP LT1 5.7-liter V8 borrowed from the Corvette. Painted only in black, dark cherry, or green-gray metallic, and riding on a lowered Caprice police package chassis, the Impala SS became a cult icon almost overnight. It was the spiritual successor to the muscle-bound sedans of the late 60s, a four-door bruiser for the family man who still remembered what a burnout smelled like. But by '96, GM was winding down B-body production. The Arlington plant was being repurposed for SUV manufacturing, and the bean counters were eager to close the book on big rear-wheel drive sedans. Still, inside Chevrolet's performance division, some engineers weren't ready to let it die. In whispered corners of GM's Milford Proving Grounds, a few holdouts started playing with a radical idea. What if the next Impala SS wasn't just a rebadged Caprice with cop shocks? What if it was a monster? The plan was simple in concept, devastating in execution. Take the final year 1996 Impala SS platform, gut the 5.7L LT1, and replace it with a factory crate 454 V8, the same EFI-equipped Gen 6 big block used in GM performance parts catalogs. That engine, rated conservatively at 425 horsepower and over 500 lb-ft of torque, was originally meant for off-road and marine applications. But it could be tuned, and it would fit, barely with custom motor mounts and a reinforced subframe. The prototype, allegedly coated internally as Blackbird, was painted onyx black and debadged entirely. It sat on ZR1-style Corvette wheels wrapped in Z-rated tires and was equipped with a full four-wheel disc brake conversion sourced from the Corvette and 9C1 police parts bin. Inside, it was pure stealth, charcoal leather, digital dash, and no gimmicks. The rear axle was swapped for a Dana 60 with 3.73 gears and a limited slip diff. The transmission was reportedly a 4L80E, heavy-duty and barely able to keep up with the torque. The car was said to be tested in early 1997 alongside final-year Camaro SS and Corvette C4 prototypes. In straight-line testing, it stunned GM brass, 0-60 in the low 5s, quarter-mile in the high 12s. It had enough grunt to push a 4,200-pound sedan past 150 mph on the test track with room to spare. One internal memo, never publicly confirmed, stated the car had unsatisfactory fuel economy, excessive NVH, and abnormal torsional stress near the A-pillar under wide-open throttle. But the biggest problem wasn't engineering, it was optics. By 1997, America was in the full swing of a fuel efficiency renaissance. The SUV boom was just beginning, emissions laws were tightening, and GM's leadership was obsessed with hybrid projects in the early stages of EV1 development. The last thing they wanted was to bring back the specter of gas-guzzling muscle sedans that reminded people of the very cars lawmakers wanted to ban. So the project was pulled, quietly, silently. No press release, no leaked photos, no mention in enthusiast brochures. The prototype, if it existed, was likely dismantled. Some say it was destroyed outright in the infamous GM Prototype Crusher program. Others say the engine went into a GM engineering test rig and the shell was sold at auction as a plain black Caprice with no drivetrain. But the whispers remain. An article in a 2003 issue of High Performance Chevy briefly referenced the car when interviewing a retired GM test mechanic who claimed to have driven it once. "You tap the throttle and the whole thing twisted," he said. "It wasn't a car, it was a warbird. It idled like a thunderstorm, and when it lit off at wide open, Christ, you needed 2 lanes just to stay straight." Other stories place the car at a secret black track event in Arizona, where GM engineers supposedly gathered to run their unauthorized builds after hours. One witness swore he saw a black Impala outrun a then-new Camaro SS in a straight line, then vanish before anyone could photograph it. Today, no known 454-powered 1996-97 Impala SS survives. There are custom builds, yes, backyard conversions, tribute cars, and tribute fantasies. But the prototype itself, the Blackbird, has become pure legend. It was never meant to be sold. It wasn't banned by regulation or lawsuit. The 1963 Ford Galaxie 500 lightweight drag package. Dealer Ghost is one of those whispered legends that linger in the shadows of muscle car history. A vehicle so rare and so extreme that its very existence remains a subject of heated debate among Ford historians, collectors, and drag racing aficionados. This car wasn't part of any official factory catalog or widely advertised performance program. Instead, it slipped through the cracks, a mysterious outlier delivered through unofficial channels, possibly a dealer special or a covert experiment that Ford quietly distanced itself from. In 1963, Ford was deep into the muscle car wars, fighting Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Dodge for supremacy on drag strips and speedways across the country. The Galaxie 500 was already a well-established nameplate, a full-size sedan and coupe that could be equipped with the legendary 427 cubic inch V8, a brute that pumped out upwards of 425 horsepower in its most aggressive street-legal form. Ford also offered a lightweight drag pack version of the Galaxie, stripped of excess weight with fiberglass or aluminum panels, designed to dominate the quarter-mile. But the dealer Ghost variant took things to a level that even Ford's engineers found unsettling. According to the most persistent rumors and scant documentation, at least one 1963 Galaxie 500 lightweight drag package was shipped directly to a small dealer in Georgia under mysterious circumstances. Unlike the standard lightweight drag Galaxies that had some level of factory support and documentation, this car arrived with no official window sticker or build sheet. Instead, it featured a slew of unorthodox modifications. All sound insulation was removed, aluminum bumpers replaced the steel originals, and its intake manifold bore hand-stamped markings rather than the usual factory castings. All hallmarks of a car pushed beyond production limits. The engine was the ferocious 427 side-oiler V8, but with bespoke tuning and possible experimental components not found in standard factory options. The transmission and rear end were upgraded for drag racing, and the suspension was heavily modified with factory-grade parts likely scavenged from Ford's racing programs. Some say the car even had magnesium components, a rare and volatile choice back then, to shed even more weight. The dealer who received the car reportedly sold it to a local drag racer, a man known for pushing machinery to its absolute limits. He raced the dealer Ghost for a single brutal season, where it earned a reputation for blazing fast passes and a tendency to blow its engines spectacularly under the strain. After one particularly violent engine failure on the strip, the car was parked and left to sit, its fate uncertain. For decades, the car's whereabouts were unknown. The trail runs cold in the late 1970s, only to resurface occasionally in collectors' whispers and auction rumors. Some claim it was eventually bought by a private collector in the Southeast, hidden away from public eyes. Others speculate it was disassembled, with parts recycled into other lightweight racers or restored cars, a Frankenstein machine pieced together from various Ford parts and racing bits. Ford historians remain divided. The official company records make no mention of this specific dealer Ghost lightweight Galaxie. No documented VIN numbers match the combination of features attributed to it. Photos are non-existent or unverified. Yet first-hand accounts from former Ford employees and racing insiders insist it was real, and that Ford quietly distanced itself because the car was simply too wild, too stripped down, and too dangerous for official endorsement. The legend of the 1963 Ford Galaxie 500 lightweight drag package Dealer Ghost lives on as a symbol of the rebellious, underground spirit of early muscle car racing, a vehicle built not for showroom glory, but for raw, unforgiving competition. A car that Ford couldn't officially claim, but never quite fully denied. And a ghost that still haunts the drag strips and collector forums, forever tantalizing those who crave the untamed edge of American performance history. The 1984 Pontiac Fiero GT V8 Super Duty prototype stands as one of the most tantalizing what-ifs in American automotive history, a wild, shadowy project born from the restless minds of Pontiac engineers who refused to accept the tame, underpowered reality the Fiero became known for. While the production Fiero of the early 1980s earned a reputation as a quirky, mid-engine compact with decent handling, but disappointing performance, deep inside Pontiac's secret workshops, a small group of enthusiasts dreamed bigger, much bigger. Originally, Pontiac's engineers had been developing a 2.7-liter Super Duty turbocharged four-cylinder engine rated at roughly 300 horsepower, a huge jump over the Fiero's base V6. This alone was supposed to inject new life into the model, giving it real muscle without a massive redesign. But as the story goes, one engineer, whose identity remains cloaked in mystery, wasn't satisfied with merely dropping a bigger four-cylinder into the Fiero's narrow engine bay. No, he wanted to create a true supercar out of the humble Pontiac, one that could outrun, outhandle, and outshine even the mighty Corvette. Working mostly after hours and under the radar of management, this renegade engineer embarked on a nearly impossible mission, transplanting a small block V8 into the mid-engine bay of a wide-body Fiero prototype. This wasn't just a simple engine swap, it was a mechanical puzzle that demanded custom mounts, bespoke cooling systems with enlarged radiators, inducting, reinforced suspension arms, and an upgraded braking system to handle the newfound power. The wide-body Fiero GT chassis was stretched and strengthened to accommodate this radical drivetrain, with additional chassis bracing welded in to tame the raw torque. Dubbed the Bat by the clandestine team for its sleek black paint and stealthy nocturnal test sessions, the Fiero GT V8 was a beast in every sense. Its 300-plus horsepower V8, likely a 305 or 350 cubic inch small block variant, propelled the car with blistering acceleration, reportedly outpacing contemporaneous Corvette models in straight-line tests. The car's low weight and mid-engine balance made it nimble, but the sheer power packed into such a small chassis pushed the limits of control. Drivers described it as a wild animal on the edge, capable of mind-blowing speed but ready to snap into a near spin at any moment, especially on the challenging test tracks at GM's proving grounds. The car's spectacular speed came paired with equally dramatic handling quirks. Without modern electronic traction, control, or stability aids, the Bat demanded a fearless and highly skilled driver. During one infamous late-night test run, the car nearly spun into a retaining wall after an aggressive corner entry, a close call that reportedly rattled the team. Concerned about liability and the car's unpredictability, management refused to acknowledge the project once they got wind of it. Following the near accident, the prototype was quietly stripped of its unique components, and the wide-body chassis was repurposed for other experimental projects. The engine, transmission, and suspension bits disappeared into GM's parts vaults or were cannibalized for other test vehicles. The Bat was never officially documented, never publicly shown, and never considered for production. It became an unspoken ghost in Pontiac's history, an engine-swapped, no-holds-barred supercar prototype that lived only in whispered stories among GM insiders and a handful of engineers who knew the truth. Despite its short, secretive life, the legacy of the 1984 Pontiac Fiero GT V8 Super Duty prototype persists as a symbol of what might have been. It represents the clash between raw passion and corporate caution in the automotive world. The engineer's dream crushed under layers of red tape and risk aversion. The Bat reminds enthusiasts that beneath the Fiero's unassuming exterior lurked the potential for greatness. A supercar that could have redefined Pontiac's image in the 1980s and carved a unique niche in the pantheon of American performance cars. Instead, it vanished into the shadows, a thrilling legend that still fires the imagination of gearheads and dreamers alike. The 1959 Chrysler 300E fuel injection test car is a fascinating and largely forgotten chapter in American automotive history, representing a bold but quietly buried leap toward fuel injection technology long before it became commonplace. During the late 1950s, as muscle cars and big block V8s were roaring onto the scene, Chrysler engineers were quietly experimenting with new ways to extract more power and efficiency from their legendary 392 cubic inch Hemi engine. While carburetors still dominated the era, the allure of fuel injection, a technology promising better throttle response, improved fuel economy, and greater reliability, was undeniable. Chrysler's engineers, inspired by the pioneering work General Motors had begun with Rochester fuel injection systems on the Corvette, managed to secure a prototype setup for testing on their own flagship muscle coupe, the Chrysler 300E. This wasn't a casual experiment. It was a serious attempt to leapfrog the competition with a cutting-edge fuel delivery system. The 300E Coupe, chosen for this mission, was already a formidable powerhouse, packing a robust 392 Hemi engine capable of pushing serious horsepower for its day. But the installation of the experimental Rochester fuel injection transformed it into a machine far ahead of its time. The system replaced traditional carburetors with a series of carefully calibrated injectors, delivering fuel directly into the intake manifold under computer-like mechanical control, a marvel for the pre-computer era. The results were astonishing. Throttle response was crisp and immediate. Fuel delivery was more precise, and engine reliability and smoothness improved dramatically. The test car reportedly ran flawlessly during extensive road and track testing, showing gains in performance and drivability that impressed the engineers but threatened to disrupt the status quo of production carburetor technology. However, despite the technical success, Chrysler's corporate leadership hesitated. The fuel injection system was prohibitively expensive to mass produce in 1959, and the American consumer market was still largely unfamiliar and wary of such advanced technology. The timing was off, emissions regulations were still in their infancy, and the market's appetite for innovation and fuel delivery was minimal. The potential costs and risk associated with launching a fuel-injected muscle car seemed to outweigh the benefits in the eyes of Chrysler's executives. Consequently, the program was abruptly shut down. The test car, the 300e Coupe fitted with the cutting-edge Rochester injection, was quietly driven off the road and stored away in a Chrysler warehouse. There it sat forgotten for years, its groundbreaking technology hidden beneath the polished exterior of a classic muscle coupe. The project was so hush-hush that even many Chrysler employees were unaware of its existence. Decades later, the car resurfaced in the hands of a private collector who immediately recognized the significance of its rare fuel injection system. Unfortunately, the discovery sparked controversy. When a magazine broke the story and published photos of the rare test car and its advanced setup, Chrysler's corporate legal team swiftly intervened. They confiscated the vehicle, citing proprietary technology and corporate confidentiality, and the car vanished once again into an undisclosed location, presumably a corporate vault or museum storeroom. Today, the 1959 Chrysler 300e fuel injection test car remains one of the most enigmatic and elusive relics of early American muscle car innovation. It was a visionary project that anticipated the fuel injection revolution that would sweep the industry decades later, yet it was silenced by the caution and conservatism of its era. For enthusiasts and historians, it stands as a tantalizing symbol of what might have been, a glimpse of future technology caught in the past, forever locked away in Chrysler's secret archives, a ghostly testament to the road not taken. The 2006 Dodge Magnum SRT10, equipped with the monstrous 8.3-liter Viper V10 engine, stands as one of the most tantalizing lost legends in the world of American muscle cars, an untamed beast forged in the secretive backrooms of Chrysler's performance division, never meant to see the light of day but whispered about endlessly among enthusiasts. This one-of-a-kind prototype represented a daring fusion of raw power and unconventional practicality, a brutal expression of what muscle wagons could be if regulations, liability fears, and corporate caution hadn't strangled it before it was born. In the early 2000s, Dodge's street and racing technology, SRT team, was firing on all cylinders, pushing the envelope with vehicles like the Ram SRT-10 truck and the Viper supercar. Among the engineers and designers in this tight-knit, performance-obsessed group, a handful shared a rebellious vision. What if they took the snarling, naturally aspirated Viper V10, already a legend in its own right, with over 500 horsepower of pure fury, and dropped it into the Dodge Magnum platform? The Magnum, a relatively understated and boxy 5-door wagon, was a sleeper canvas just begging for an outrageous makeover. What followed was a labor of passion and engineering wizardry. The standard Magnum chassis was brutally reworked. The front suspension was reinforced and recalibrated to handle the staggering torque, while the braking system was upgraded with massive Brembo calipers and rotors to tame the power. Custom cooling solutions were designed to keep the thirsty Viper engine within safe temperature ranges during spirited driving. A 6-speed manual transmission, adapted from the Viper, was mated to the power plant, ensuring the car retained the visceral, connected feel that hardcore enthusiasts craved. The exterior retained most of the Magnum's familiar lines, but the stance was aggressive, lowered, with wide, sticky tires filling the wheel wells, hinting at the terror beneath. The paint was a deep, menacing red, polished to a mirror shine. Inside, the interior was a functional cockpit rather than a luxury lounge, featuring race-inspired seats, special instrumentation pulled from the Viper parts bin, and a minimalist roll cage discreetly integrated for added safety. The car was a paradox, a muscle car masquerading as a family wagon, perfectly capable of devouring highways and leaving supercars in the dust, while hauling gear or kids in relative comfort. The prototype was kept under tight wraps, tested only at private tracks and GM's proving grounds late at night to avoid leaks. On the track, the car's performance was jaw-dropping, 0 to 60 in the low 4-second range, quarter-mile times that rivaled dedicated sports cars, and a terrifying growl from the V10 that echoed through every twist and turn. Test drivers were in awe of its capabilities, but also quick to admit it was a handful. Its immense power and torque delivery demanded respect, skill, and a healthy dose of bravery to control. Despite the undeniable performance and the cult potential of this radical Magnum SRT10, corporate realities soon caught up. Safety regulators expressed concerns over crashworthiness given the heavy engine and modified chassis. Emissions certification was a logistical nightmare. Liability teams warned about the dangers of putting a 500-horsepower engine in a vehicle not originally designed for that level of performance, especially one that might appeal to younger or less experienced drivers looking for a practical but powerful daily driver. The risk of lawsuits and insurance complications was deemed too high. Executives, fearing backlash and legal exposure, ordered the program terminated. The prototype was quickly dismantled, with many components either destroyed or stored away indefinitely. Dodge erased nearly every trace of the Magnum SRT10 Viper V10 from official records, and the car faded into the shadows of automotive legend. A single blurry photo surfaced years later on a niche forum, sparking heated debate, but never confirmed by Chrysler. Whispers from former SRT engineers, now retired or working elsewhere, only fueled the mystique, describing the car as a wolf in sheep's clothing and the most fun and terrifying thing we ever built. Today, the 2006 Dodge Magnum SRT10 Viper V10 remains a ghost story told in hushed tones among muscle car aficionados. A car born from pure, unfiltered enthusiasm and engineering bravado, snuffed out by the cold hand of corporate caution. It embodies the ultimate what might have been in American performance history, a potent symbol of creativity and rebellion crushed by the realities of modern automotive business. To those who know the tale, it's not just a car, it's a legend, a forbidden beast that dared to break every rule and was forever silenced, leaving only the roar of its memory echoing through the annals of muscle car lore.